Appreciate you. Thank you so much for stepping in for Aaron tonight. I know I just appreciate you. Okay. Mitchell, Adrian just told me, he said it's exciting for him to be in the driver's seat because he's controlling everything tonight. Greetings, Tony Mobley here. Greetings and welcome to Conversation with Tony Mobley. Yes, we're back with a new episode of Conversation with Tony Mobley. Tonight, I'm having a conversation with Mr. Mitchel Hill, and he is going to be on tonight, and we are so excited to have him on tonight. This is episode 48. That's right. This is episode 48 of Conversation with Tony Mobley. Why are we here? We are here because life has provided me the opportunity to have real conversations with real people. My hope is that after this conversation, you will get to know Mitchel Hill much better. First, I want to thank my guest from last week, Triumphant Michael D. Jenkins, for our conversation last week. And if you missed that conversation, I encourage you to go back and watch that conversation. I want to thank the team behind Conversations with Tony Mobley. So we are here to have real conversation, and we hope to help others with these conversations. But I need your help. I know I'm a broken record. I want you to go to my website, conversationwithTonyMobley.com. Why do I want you to go there? I want you to go there so that you can register. What's the benefit of you registering? Well, let me tell you. The benefit of you registering is that you can participate in the Mukana chat. That's right. The Mukana chat. Well, what in the world is the Mukana chat? The Mukana chat is an opportunity for you to ask your questions, and those questions get to be voted up and down. That's right. If you register at conversationwithTonyMobley.com, register, then you can ask your questions in the Mukana chat, and those questions can be voted up and down. So if you like this conversation, and if you like past conversations, we ask that you like and subscribe. Set that bell to all notifications so that you can be reminded of upcoming conversations. And now we're going to talk with our friend, Mitchel Hill. Mitchel Hill, thank you so much for being on Conversation with Tony Mobley tonight. Looking forward to having a great conversation with you. And hopefully the world will get to know you a little bit better.
Greetings, Tony.
Greetings, sir. And our first question tonight is, who is Mitchel Hill? I know I asked everybody that same question, who they are.
It is a work in progress, as most people would say. And it's a little uncomfortable answering a question where I have to talk about myself. But as anybody that knows me, I love it. I love talking about myself. But before we get started, I just want to say one or two things. And the first is, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be on your program. Because nowadays, conversations are hard to come by. You start to talk with somebody, you eventually run into what Alex on Office Hours calls fissionable material. I don't seem to be able to go very far in a conversation. So I welcome the opportunity to be on this program because a conversation between two intelligent human beings that have ideas and experiences to share is an oddity these days without bumping into some kind of a negativity. So I don't see any negativity. I don't feel negative. I know that the millions upon millions of people that are watching right now as your audience, and I'll promise them one thing in return for making the decision to watch right now, because they could be watching Star Wars reruns, TV shows, the news, and they've chosen to be here on Conversations with Tony Mobley with a mediocre guest, Mitchel Hill. So I promise to make it the most unusual interview you've had so far by just being crazy.
Okay, And we're going to get back to that whole thing about interview. This is not an interview. This is us having a conversation.
Exactly.
And
So,
and and
yeah,
and
it's your
and the other
show.
thing too is I don't know about millions watching, Mitchell. I don't know about Mitchell.
Me?
I don't know about
There
millions
aren't?
watching, but 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 however many are watching, they will have a authentic conversation between two people.
Okay.
And
Well,
so
I
then
promise to
that's
be
what we're looking
honest.
at.
I promise to be honest, and maybe I'll uncover a few quirks and entertaining anecdotes that will make it worth their while. Because if they registered to be on your program, then certainly they should get their money's worth. So here's my attempt at doing it. Answering your first question, who's Mitchel Hill? I'm a very complicated person because I had a career in broadcasting earlier in my life. And all of us in broadcasting tend to have a personality that we sort of, I don't know, it's a sort of an actor's part that you play. And it served me very well when I was a younger man. So I've had three, maybe four personas in my broadcasting career that allowed me to develop who I am. And I promise that while I'm here, I'll try not to be the radio guy, not the DJ, not the announcer, but Mitchel Hill. And who is that guy? I'm a person that's always been able or lucky enough to do what I want to do and not live with any consequences to that. That allowed me to make career changes pretty drastically, like every 10 years or so, and no consequences to it. I'm not married. I think at an early age, I found that marriage was not going to work for me, but it's good for other people, but for me, it was not. I do have a very faithful dog who listens to everything I have to say, and often gives his own opinions about, well, Mitch, you were a little short with that person, or that telemarketer didn't deserve what you just said to them. So I listen to what he has to say because he's taught me how to live in the moment. And that's an interesting lesson to learn from your dog, is that he's saying, don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about yesterday. Live in the moment. So Mitchel Hill is a guy that lives in the moment. I have no filter. I pretty much say what I think. It comes out. My mother calls it being brutally honest. That's a kind way. My sister calls it comedy Tourette's. It sort of runs the gamut. So if you're lucky enough to be able to be yourself and do what you want to do and not be afraid of the consequences, then you have found the nirvana that I have been able to find.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. When did you know the path was for you as a radio personality?
I grew up listening, like a lot of people my age, and I'm like 67 now, listening to radio DJs on the radio and being fascinated with the personalities and, who were these people. When I was a kid, lying in bed, going to sleep, listening to Ronnie Cash on WJET in Erie, Pennsylvania, I always thought of myself as a person that was observing what was going on. But this guy just seemed to be magical, and he could take you places, not only with the stories he would tell, but also with the music that they played. And I just think that was the coolest thing in the world. And as I grew up listening to AM radio, back in those days when we used to listen to AM, not FM, AM radio at night used to skip off the ionosphere, so you could hear radio stations all over the world, mostly in the country. They were called clear channel stations. So we were exposed to broadcasters and announcers and personalities all over the place, whether it was CKLW in Ontario, Canada, or WLS in Chicago. Radio stations all over came in all over at night. So I got a chance to hear all these people. And the radio I used was this little red battery-less radio that was shaped like a rocket, and it would pick up these signals and with just enough power to broadcast into my earphones. So I spent most of the night with a flashlight and the covers over my head and my earphones on, listening to these guys and pretending I was in the room with them while they were doing all these things, playing music and having a blast. So I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I started doing it myself. I got, back in the day, There was the Mr. Microphone, practicing with that into a speaker, having your own bedroom radio station that could broadcast just to the next room. And you'd try to talk people, my sister or my brother, to listen to it in the other room. And it just went on and on until I was in high school. And we had what was called a carrier current radio station where we broadcast. And I think most of the time I was probably in a room by myself playing records, talking to myself, because there was probably nobody really actually listening to. But in my mind, I was one of those guys in the middle of the night broadcasting all over the world from parts, exotic places, all over the country. So it was fun, and one thing kind of led to another. And as I sort of role played these radio guys, eventually I got a job at the local radio station, and I got to be one of those personalities. And what was cool about it, and I won't tell too long a story, but this was cool. I was a very introverted kid. I was a bit of a nerd when I was in school. I got picked on. I had the pocket protector with the pens in it. I liked science and science fiction. And all of a sudden, I had this job at a local radio station where I was a personality and an individual that nobody knew about. And, I just sort of took it, again, started creating. You could create any kind of personality you want. I was Bobby Dark. That was the name I had. And I was Bobby Dark in my freshman year in high school, and I never told anybody at school. So, I'd be, standing there talking or getting teased about something, and somebody say, "Hey, did you hear what Bobby Dark did last night on the radio? It was hilarious." And I just sit there and go, "This is how Superman was, or Flash, or one of the other characters." They had this alter ego, and they got this chance to be a fly in the wall and hear all these personalities. And it also allowed me to approach other people or women for a date, girls back then. And that was, again, it was just feeding into this whole idea that there was a personality that was bigger than life. So that was all what led me into the idea that being a broadcaster or a radio guy was cool, because you had this shield that you had, that the alter ego that you could place in front of yourself, and you could say, do, or play any kind of music that nobody would ever make a connection back to Mitchel Hill. So that's how I got into. That was the path that led me into broadcasting.
And that voice, that magnificent voice, didn't hurt either.
Well, thanks. Thing about the voice, always get asked that. When you first start out on radio, you talk like everybody else until your voice changes, and eventually it changes. But the more you used it, the better it got, and the more you practiced, it became, a radio voice or a clear announcer voice. And to this day, right now, I'm talking into a microphone on a conversation with Tony Mobley. I can't help but be a little bit of a radio voice guy, because it just comes out naturally. It does serve me well in business meetings and other things, because I have other careers that I've been in. And in a meeting, if I need to get attention, I can just lay in that radio voice, and it cuts right through the crowd, and lets me be heard and seen and taken seriously. So it was fun.
Fantastic. Please share your experience of working at a radio station.
I began to say the story about working at the local top 40 radio station. Back then, there was only like 2 or 3 of them, because AM was the main outlet. And I got a job at the biggest top 40 radio station in the town I grew up in, which is right here in Wilmington, Delaware. And the station's name was WAMS. And as I said earlier, I volunteered myself to do any job. And this is, again, advice, too, to anybody that wants to get into any career that requires skills and, internship. And that is, I would do anything. I would play tapes on Sunday mornings. I would play all the religious programs. I would carry speakers to when we did broadcast remotes and things like that. And in the beginning, I would have paid them to do the job. So I sort of got my foot in the door. And finally, the powers that be sort of noticed and say, "Who is that kid? What's he doing?" And we need somebody to do all nights and play records. And I was like, "Me?" So the fun thing about starting out, I remember telling my mom and dad that I was going to work someplace all night, and they were kind of curious about it. It never occurred to me that they might say no because they didn't. And my first big job in radio was doing the all night show for 6 hours. And I was the only one in the building. It was a pretty big building. There was nobody else on the property. And I have a very strong visual image of sitting in the control room, which back then was very impressive. The console, all the cartridge tape machines. And we played records back then, folks. And looking out the window, and we had 5 big radio towers out on the property. And I was playing like Rocket Man by Elton John. And the lights were going on and off. And yet our signal was blasting out into the air. People were hearing all over and calling. And something about it just resonated as the coolest thing in the world to be there in your little space capsule, broadcasting out to the world. Of course, it wasn't. It was just the neighborhood and the city. But that was the most amazing beginning to my career in broadcasting, is being that DJ on that radio station under that disguised name, Bobby Dark, and nobody at school knew about it, at least not in the beginning.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mitchell, for that. We have a question from Germany from Kristen. And I'm not going to mess up your last name, Kristen, so I'm not even going to try to say it. I'm going to say Kristen from Germany. And it says, "Hello, Mitchell. How does being online with office hours on a daily basis inspire your daily life right now?"
I reckon I recognize Kristen's name, Kristen Osterkamp, who's asked questions before, and I've had the liberty of being able to say her name. It's really interesting how offers. So we're just sort of jumping ahead a little bit in the timeline, but why not? I've been off the radio since the mid '90s, and I've been involved in a couple other business ventures. And when office hours came along, it came out of an interest in improving the quality of Zoom calls, which basically we're on right now. We're on a Zoom webinar or a Zoom call of some sort. And the idea was there was so much bad content that was being put out there, and visually bad, audio bad, and lighting bad. And office hours came along with this idea and this mission to improve the quality by sharing information. And I think the mission statement is something to the effect that no conversation is left behind. So here is an opportunity for everybody to say, how can you get your microphone to sound so good? Or how can you affect your lights? How can you do that? I think that, Tony, you've also gotten the benefit of good advice from the office hours crew. So that resonated with me too. And it sort of fed my need to still be a radio guy because, once a radio guy, always a radio guy. And it's been 30 years since I've been on the air. But in a sense, now I'm on the air in a completely different way by streaming. And office hours allows me to do that. And doing it 7 days a week, for the most part, I'm not required, but I like to show up. It's a unique experience because there's a community involved there, and there are people that are like-minded and think similar ways. And you have a starting point. And as we began to say earlier about conversations, Tony, is that it's hard to have conversations with people these days. Somehow geeks and technical people tend to have a common interest in the technology, and we get excited about it. And it's a good starting point, whereas in other situations, it may not quite be so easy to have a conversation. So I like it for the conversation. I like it for the exposure, and it allows me to put my radio guy hat on for a while.
Yeah, I would say to Christian, first, thank you so much for the question. The reason that we're having conversations right now, this conversation right now, is because the office hours community made the decision that they were going to take on the mantle of what Alex was promoting, in that a digital conversation where no one is left behind. And conversation with Tony Mobley was grown out of this desire for people in various places throughout the world having a conversation that was around video production, but it transcended video production. Video production was what it started out as having, but the way we were able to help educators at the beginning of the pandemic. My own journey was, surviving cancer and having an opportunity to help a small church navigate the pandemic, where they were no longer able to operate in their in-person worship. And because of office hours, I was able to help them navigate um, that arena to move from in person to streaming. And they are thriving. And for the last 2 weeks, they have posted services on YouTube. And that is directly related to office hours.
Well, it's directly
So,
related to what you're doing too, Tony. And let me give you a compliment. You were one of the first people that I met on office hours back. It's been almost a year, believe it or not, that I've been on it. You've probably been on at least that long. And the thing I noticed about Tony was he's a deep thinker. You got to watch him very closely because he's not like me. I'm like the little dog that jumps up all the time, trying to get attention. Tony just leans back and he thinks about what's going on around him and then asks very intelligent questions. And I think it translated very well into conversations with Tony Mobley because Tony just sort of has this way, the way he talks, that's so relaxing and so measured. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Tony's got a voice that's like if you were on an airplane and the left engine was on fire and Tony was the pilot, Tony would come on and say, well, I'm sorry, but the left engine's on fire and now the right one's on, but we're going to put this plane down very carefully and quietly, and then we'll all go on about our lives. And Tony just has this way, oh, that's okay. That's fine. Let the engines burn because Tony said it was going to be okay. So, Tony, that's my compliment to you is that you are Mr. Mellow. You're very cool and you're very collected, but there's a great mind behind all of that, and it's a positive experience to be sitting here across from you, watching your response to my ridiculous comments.
well, thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate that. And we're going to go on to the next question. And it says, can you share a past success story and a recent one?
Well, I joining office hours, that was a success story, and that's a fairly recent one. I had I'm semi-retired, but I still have the experiences of doing what I do. And I'll just give you a really quick synopsis. Some years ago, I got into video editing, digital editing, and design using a program called After Effects, which is a layering and compositing program. And it's allowed me to have a business. And I made the transition from working in a building. My analogy is what used to take millions of dollars, thousands of square feet, and hundreds of people to turn out commercials and video can now be done by one person sitting in a room with the lights down and their dog sitting patiently next to them. So I made that transition into selling the inventory between my ears, and the success was it gave me a lifestyle that allows me to work on things when I want to, and when I'm not inclined to, I don't. And somehow I'm able to make enough money. So the success story is being able to retire but still have enough income and people interested in what you do. And then for me personally, so things don't get boring, because they do if you don't keep yourself primed like a pump, office hours came along, and all of a sudden I had a way to express myself in a completely new thing. I mean, there used to be AM radio, FM radio, and now there's internet radio. or streaming. So this is a completely new method of communicating and getting your voice out across the area. So the success story, and it's a recent one, is being able to make that transition at my age in a semi-retired state and still feel like I'm contributing. That's the thing.
A couple of things. So, is After Effects actually purchased by Adobe? Because I thought that it was a part of the Adobe suite.
It is. It is now. Way back when, and again, I always go way back, some 25, maybe 30 years ago. After Effects wasn't called After Effects; it was called COSA
Okay.
After Effects, and it was made by a British compositing and layering program, and it was the basis for what After Effects is today. And then Adobe came along and bought them, sort of like the way
Okay.
Adobe bought Aldus PageMaker and turned it into PageMaker. And now it is part of a suite of programs. And what what is different between what it was when it was COSA, and I have the dongles to prove that I've had it. Um, the thing that makes it unique, and I think that they continue to innovate in spite of the fact it's an old program, is that they keep adding capabilities to it that make it better and better and better. Like most recently, here's an old program. It's got a lot of old code in it. Well, they just rewrote it for the M1 Mac, which is takes advantage of the silicon M1 capability, which is supercharging computer processing. It mainly happens in the GPU side of things, but it's a huge success for Apple, and I'm looking forward to see what the next big thing from them. So when you add the After Effects effect to the thing, you've got a program that's an old friend that does things, but now it integrates with other programs within the Adobe world. For example, it has connections within Photoshop, Illustrator. You can bring these programs in and out of After Effects, and it's not like you have to round trip them in the old days. Now it's just a mouse click away before you can change the shape of something, or you want to create a graphic template in After Effects that you use in Premiere over and over, but you want to stay in Premiere to change, let's say, that it's a lower third title with a name and a subject line for who they are and what they do. You can use a thing called Essential Graphics to bring After Effects right into Premiere, and it's integrated and wired into it. So now you can bring that template in, and within Premiere, you can change the name of the person and their description, and you can make that change, and it updates the graphic. You didn't have to go out of the program to do it with After Effects. So this integration of all these programs within the Adobe ecosystem made it even better than it was. I'm sure they'll continue to improve it, but that made After Effects, to me, a more modern, useful product. And the fact that it has plugins, which mean third parties can go out there and create these things that go into After Effects that make it do wonderful things, like Mocha, for example, is a program that Boris Effects now owns. And Mocha allows you to do rotoscoping, which used to be very painstaking and hard to do, where you could take an image or a part of somebody, and you could set the parameters for the outline of the person's body or shape or whatever, or even what's on a T-shirt, for example, and then run it into Mocha, and Mocha calculates all the frames and allows you to substitute something else into it. So a wonderful program. I know I'm getting very technical. I apologize,
But
but
that's
I like.
that's okay.
So
I'm sure that there are people who are listening that appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that. Um, Please share how you are embracing new technology for personal development as a lifelong learner. And I'll tell you why that lifelong learner is in there. I think everybody that's a part of the office hours community is interested in lifelong learning. So tell us
But
about it.
if you don't, Tony, if you don't, and I'll tell the listeners this, if you don't embrace new technology and changes, you're going to be left behind. And nobody wants to be the guy that still has a pet rock collection and claims that that's fun. With technology, there have been some huge sea changes in things that have happened. Now, because of my age and my experience in the business, I can look back on the way we used to do things versus the way we do things now. For example, there was a time when we used actual tape, not only to record voice, but also to record video. And you had to physically handle this substance or substrate in order to make things happen. On audio, we used to use reel-to-reel tape machines. And the recordings were recorded from start to finish on this little piece of plastic that had iron filings or whatever the material was, a magnetic material. And if you wanted to edit something, take a piece out from the beginning to the end, you physically took that piece of tape and put it into a little jig and got a razor blade out and cut it and then joined it together with a piece of tape, believe it or not. I mean, physical tape. And then that was the way things used to be. When digital audio workstations came along, no longer did you have to work in this linear fashion with a piece of tape with splicing and razor blades. It was all done digitally. And the idea was that they used the methodology that you used before, but they used the advantages of digital. So when these things came along, as things began to develop in the technology and in the industry, you're exposed to them. You're forced to embrace it, or at least understand it, and take advantage of it, because it brings positives and negatives. For the most part, positives. I was involved in some of the early development of digital video editing, and I was exposed to it. It was a gee whiz moment when I saw my first Avid system. And later on, a company came out with, we'll call it the poor man's Avid, called Media 100. And it was just a cheaper, easier way to do editing. But the significance was that it was online editing. Quality was good enough that you didn't have to output it and do an offline versus an online edit. And I said, wow, this I got to get involved in. So I just sort of, like I did when my first job in radio, I just kind of threw myself at the Molinari brothers and told them, I said, look, I think this is cool, but it would be just a little bit cooler if you did this and did this. So then I became a beta tester and helped with a little bit of the development. This was, 30 years ago. And since then, quite a lot has happened, including Media 100 just sort of fading away. But what it teaches you is that never be satisfied or stuck in technology, because it will leave you behind. And younger, more adept people are going to come along, and they don't care that you used to edit with pieces of plastic and tape and things like that. All they know is that, oh, that's cool. They didn't care that in radio we used to play vinyl records on turntables. So what? I got an iPad or iPod that'll play music just as well. So the problem was mine, if I fought it. And the funny thing about all this is, and I'm sorry for being random in the way I think, a lot of what we do in the video production business is based on film, and film is based on tradition. So a lot of the things that made film what it is today is based on tried and true ways of telling stories and how you cut it, and using an A roll and a B roll and camera angles and all the rules about rule of thirds and all those things that make film what it is. Well, those are old rules, but being applied to new technology. So embrace it.
Absolutely.
If you don't embrace it, you're going to be left behind.
I want to tell you a funny story. I actually had a photography business for a very short time. Had a really, I would say, decent, wasn't the highest end Nikon, but I had a pretty nice Nikon camera, and I had the first several versions of the Sony digital cameras, and I was using them both for my photography business. And so I had a friend who was, big time photographer, big time. And he had every kind of a film camera that you can imagine. And he started laughing at me. He was like, man, you crazy. You trying to use film and digital. You crazy doing that. And I said, well, I just want to try to do the best I can and figure this out because I think this is what's going to be coming. And he had the best of the best of the best of the film cameras. So I saw him about 2 years later. Everything was digital.
Yeah.
Everything was digital. And I said, this is going away, huh? we had a good laugh about it.
But Tony,
But
that's a test. That's a test for you to embrace something new. And if something in your head said, I like how I used to do things, but this is a better way to do it, and you embraced that and you went with it. Not everybody
yeah,
can do that.
yeah, I did, and I was thankful that I did that. I was, Mitch. I'm gonna just tell you this little quick story. Um, when I first started work, I was working for a nonprofit. It was Big Brothers Big Sisters, and what I did was I was actually a case manager, and I would evaluate and do background checks on people that wanted to be big brothers. And so that was all when I was doing it was all paperwork. And so while I was there, they started bringing in computers that would do all of the. And so I didn't have a computer at home, so I was spending so much time at work playing with the computer after I had done my work. Right? So my wife was saying, "You need to come home. You need to come home." I said, "Well, I want to do a few more things on the computer." And I was reading about computers, and so she ended up buying me a computer. I think I got a compact. I don't know what the name of model number what it was. So one of the original ones. So I've always been that person that would read about technology even before I had an opportunity to experience it. And I think that that's part of why so many of us in the office hours community, do what we do. And we're always being adventurous and trying to learn new things. And we try to do things a little bit ahead of the curve. So there are some exciting things coming. So stay tuned.
And there's some mind-boggling things because sometimes in office hours we go off on one of our digital tangents, and they start mentioning these long acronyms for things that they've got, and I'm like scratching my head saying, I don't know what the heck they're talking about, but I sure want to look like I know what. Yeah, yeah. You want the OCDWXY and the flow doohickey plugged into the Frabber. It's funny. It's very hard to keep up with it, but I think that we're people that are into the gear, and I think that they'll nod their heads while I say this. You're open to that. You're thinking outside the box, but you're open to the idea that there's a different way to do things, and if you can imagine it, it can happen. And that imagination and that inspiration, even if it's painful sometimes and expensive, it's what moves us. And if you don't, I mean, here I am at the twilight of my career, and I'm still embracing new technology. Why? I mean, I'm not going to start a new big giant business. I'm going to dabble in it, but I want to know everything there is about it. I want to know all of it. Bring it on. I'm like a sponge.
Absolutely.
So that's a great
And
story.
I would say this too. Thank goodness that office hours is on YouTube, and so we can when we know we don't know what's going on, we can rewatch it and maybe figure it out. So
Well, it's funny that every day there's a group of panelists who are there to answer the questions for the producers. Producers are essentially the people out there, like the people watching right now, for example, that have questions that are technical in nature and sometimes philosophical, and they can ask them. I mean, there's no pressure. There's some anonymity. I'm trying to say the proper word, and they can ask it, and then this group of panelists respond to it, and everybody chimes in on the basis of their knowledge, and you're not being judged. If you cross the line and you say something patently wrong, you're going to get flagged on it, but it's a learning experience. That's just the way it is. So
mm,
generally, I raise my hand when it's something I know about because I like audio, I like post-production. When they start talking about musical instruments and things like that, I generally lay back and let it go where it's going. But you got to wonder what are the qualifications for the panelists that are sitting there. Well, the qualification is they're passionate about this business. They're interested in it. They may not be the designer, and in some cases they are. They're the people that actually wrote the software that's being talked about, and other people like you or me, we're fans, and we get to raise our hand or say, "Hey, I know I've run across that problem," and you help solve it. So as a community, it gets done. And again, Tony, it's a conversation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And this is, I think, the best part. There are people that are part of this community that are doing fantastic, cutting edge things. But and I consider myself a little person in terms of who I am. But just the idea that this little guy in Noonan, Georgia, gets to interact with guys that are in the Philippines that are video production, audio engineers, and guys that are in California that are captains of industry and CEOs and officials in different companies and stuff like that. People are able to interact, and this is really not so much a shout out to office hours, but I think it's important for people to understand that there is value in you as a person, and that you can make a contribution to this global conversation where no one is left behind. And it's not perfect. Of course, it's not perfect. There isn't anything in the world that's perfect, but I can tell you that it's pretty good. And the inspiration for Conversation with Tony Mobley was an outgrowth of these people, regardless to where they were in the world, being able to have a quality conversation about video production. And I can help a small church in the middle of the state of Georgia, and I'm 90 to 100 miles away. And I'm able to do that because of my participation with these people who are extremely knowledgeable and willing to share information. And the most important thing is that they allow you to ask what you might perceive as a stupid question. But this is the thing about the question that you ask. You can ask the same question every day and you might get a different answer.
You might. You might. I think the people in office hours, when I first joined, I did it cold turkey only because I just pushed buttons until I got on the air, and then all of a sudden I'm in this room with all these people, and I'm like, oh gosh, what have I done here? And I was accepted guardedly because I'm a loud and talkative guy, and I didn't feel like I got judged, and I was embraced. And I saw the same thing happening to all kinds of other folks in there. You were embraced. I was embraced. Everybody. It's a family. And I like the fact that Conversations has extended that philosophy and that knowledge in a completely different area, a different venue that allows it to be an extension of that communication or the conversation. And you're the man
And,
making it happen.
and again, I want to say thank you, Mitchell, for being here tonight.
My
And
pleasure.
and so we're having a question from our guest from last week, Mr. Mr. Michael D. Jenkins, the artist known as Triumphant from North Carolina, says, "Hey Mitchell, here's a question for you. What decade was or is your favorite decade in music?"
Ah, that's a great question, Michael. I love that one. If I could go into a wayback machine and go back in time and live the music, I'd go back to the days of funk, the early funk music back in the '70s. Sly and the Family Stone, um, Bootsy Collins. I always had a thing for it. It spoke to me from the soul. I know that music has changed quite a bit since then, but Jam and Gold, classic funk, just does it for me. I just love it.
Thank you, Michael. Triumphant, Michael. Thank you for that great question. And Kristen is back again from Germany. Okay. Where will you develop? Where will you develop in the next 2 years?
I'm not sure I understand that. Where, technology or me personally, how I'll develop? I'm not sure how to answer that. I think it's a matter of you just have to have your mind open. You have to have an open mind to enhancements into the business. Um, I'll give you an example. And I know it's kind of technical. Embracing Dante as a way to get audio distributed. You know, I'm an old-fashioned analog guy where you plug the input and the output, and you got this thing, and you got all these wires, and they go one place to the other, and it all works. All of a sudden, there's this new way of doing things where you just plug one wire in, and it communicates over IP and audio over IP. They're doing the same thing with video now. Um, it opens the doors to future developments and the way things are going to be doing. And you know, I've got a nice little studio here where I do a lot of voiceover work, and it's all digital, but it's AES EBU digital. And it's still input to output to input to output. So I got a huge farm of wires back there to make it work. So the idea of embracing new technology or seeing what Dante can do for me or other similar technologies in broadcasting, there's a thing called WheatNet, made by a company called Wheatstone, and then there's Axia, which has an IP-based system. You know, in old radio days, again, it was punching punch blocks and XLR connectors, and now it's all you have to be an IT expert. So this is all leading to a very interesting confluence of technologies because you know, in the old days in radio, you had to be an engineer to keep the transmitter going, keep the audio console happy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, nowadays, if you're going to be an engineer in a radio station, you better know IT because 90% of everything we're doing now is IT. So that's where I see in 2 years is a complete and total switch to that technology.
Thank you for that great question, Kristen. And thank you, Mitchell, for your answer. Douglas Carmichael is here and he says, I love the look of your background. What camera and lens are you using?
Is that directed at me?
That's directed at you.
Okay. First of all, Douglas, you ask the best questions every single day on office hours, and I love them. They're excellent. My background is what I guess you would call a realistic background. It's sort of says something about what I am and what I do. There's a radio console here where I do voiceover work. There's an on-the-air light to give you a hint that I'm an on-the-air guy. Above that, you can't see it very well, but there's a very expensive vocal microphone, which I've had all my life in the broadcasting life, called a Neumann U87. Other stuff behind me, my in-house music system, and you can be sure that I've got some good funk on there from time to time. Little meters going on, a mic stand. So it's a collection of things that says something about what I do because it just happens to be in my my edit suite. I mean, I'd take you on a tour of it, but it's kind of messy right now. I don't want to show it off because I've got new stuff down. I got all this new stuff down here that you can't see that I just installed to make the show work a little bit better for me on office hours. So, Douglas, thanks again for your thought-provoking question.
He asked also, what camera and lens are you using?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Total overkill. This is a Sony FX3, or FX3 camera. It's way more than the most people would need, but my business partner will tell you that I go overboard on everything. And the reason I'm using the Sony is that the Sonys have the very best autofocus in them. So if I take something and whip this up in front of you, notice how it snaps into focus, and then when I bring it away, it carefully goes back into focus. It also does what I call bokeh. It slightly defocuses the background, so the emphasis is what's on front. I'm using a thing called S-Cinetone, which is I guess for lack of a better term, a filtering system that makes you look good. I mean, it fills the wrinkles in a little bit. I'm a little more wrinkled than I appear. Here's a little tidbit. Everybody on camera always is actually not as good looking as they are in camera. Everybody looks better in front of a TV camera. The better the TV camera, the better you look. So to me, that I could spare no expense to make me look as good as I can at this old mug that's staring at you. And it's also the entry level camera for the Cine series, going all the way up to the Sony Venice 2, which you could technically use this camera as a B camera if you're shooting with the Venice. So that's the camera. And the other question, other device, I'm trying to see.
Lens.
Oh, the lens. When you're doing something, and it's a good question because the lens you use or the focal point that you use when you're doing Zoom calls, usually you're about 2 feet away from the camera. There's about 2 feet, 28 inches about between it. I think if you put a zoom lens, which this is a Sony G Master. Oh, it's 17 to 45 or 70. It's 70 millimeters. When you've got it in focus for the right size and the right background, this is what 40 millimeters looks like. So you could probably get a prime that's at 40 and just strap it on there and make it look good. But Sony lenses work great. They're not the best ones out there. This isn't an R-Flex or Arriflex or a Cook Prime or an Ingenue. It is what it is. So again, it's overkill. So I went too far.
And it looks good.
Oh,
looks
thank
great.
you. It has to, because it's going to make this face look good.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you for your question. Can you talk about how you got started in streaming?
Oh, streaming. The realization, Tony, was when I was in AM, I was at a big radio station in Philadelphia. It was sort of the epitome of broadcasting back in the day, and I got a chance to work there doing nights. They were a legacy radio station. I guess the similarities to the folks in Atlanta would be it was like Star 94. It was a big top 40 radio station that had most of the listeners out there. And WFIL was on AM, and they had just purchased an FM frequency from another a group, WPBS, and they were trying to decide what to do with the FM. FM was just starting to kick in. This is, let me put you in the timetable, 1978. And at the time, there was a lot of denial on the AM side saying that FM would never be anything. It was always the poor brother to it. Little did they know. But anyhow, my big push for WFIL was, you guys going to make the transition to FM? And they were like, no, no, no. And I was like the music director. I said, no, you really got to do it. And ultimately, they got tired of hearing me say that, and they fired me because I was too much of a splinter in their side. So thus began the FM wars, making AM. I guess they minimalized it in a lot of ways. And today, AM is a collection of small radio stations trying to find a niche that they're having a hard time doing. I guess talk, could be religious programming, but it's hard to make a dime on the AM side. So FM became the thing, and AM went away. The same thing today is happening to FM and regular broadcast that happened to AM back in the day. There's a little bit of denial going to it, and that is, why would you be so excited about FM? And it's, because it's been around for so long, when this new thing called streaming is out there, and it can deliver anything from anywhere at excellent quality, probably even better than what FM can. And the FM people are the naysayers now saying, that'll never happen. And it's happening. Broadcast as we know it, at least on AM and FM, is being supplanted by streaming services. And the same thing's happening to TV. Look what's happening to network television as we know it. Watching TV now on an Apple TV, for example, you're streaming. That's coming in on streaming, and the way they're able to supply all of those channels and all of those programs on demand is because of streaming. It's opened up all kinds of new capabilities. And meanwhile, the old ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, etc., are finding that they're becoming minimalized, just like the old AM radio stations that I mentioned, by this new technology. So my interest in streaming is based on seeing exactly the same kind of denial for the current mega media, saying, oh, that'll never happen. And it's happening. It's happening and will continue to happen. And unless radio, for example, changes the way they service their areas, instead of being a giant monolithic company that owns every radio station in the market, they got to get back to the mom and pa way of doing things. They got to be more hyper local in order to compete with other technologies out there. So streaming is here to stay, and it continues to move on.
And that sort of goes into the next question from Douglas Carmichael again. He said, "What would I'm sorry, would you ever think of a internet only radio station?"
Oh yeah, there's one right behind me. That again, streaming got my attention, and I had a business model some years ago. It was back when the tech punch was happening, and the idea was to provide branded radio content in retail stores instead of the traditional Muzak or putting on your favorite CD and playing it. Our idea was to do what they do on the radio, is to brand the business you're in. So let's say you walk into a Popeye's Chicken and Biscuits, and we're playing Cajun music, we're playing New Orleans style music, we're playing Zydeco, we're playing all the things you expect when you walk into New Orleans. And we're talking about how great the Popeyes brand is. And hey, did you know you could go up and get a free muffin or an extra crispy chicken sandwich? Blending the music, which was very targeted, it was hyper targeted to the audience of the people that were the consumers to the QSR, quick service restaurant, and branding it and adding a little bit of an incentive to purchase things that they wouldn't have otherwise thought of. Because in a retail environment, when somebody comes into your store, you've done all your marketing and advertising in order to grab their attention enough to coax them into the store. But once they're in the store, what are you doing to convince people to buy something? So we did this with Popeye's Chicken nationwide. Been doing it for New Balance shoes. And the idea is a branded music service that talks about the product, but also educates and entertains the people while they're in the store, which instantly translates into a purchase or at least some information. You've traded information with them. We call it fifth wall marketing because it was the marketing that was coming from the ceiling, not from the walls of the signs and things like that. So in a roundabout way, to answer your question, we started a business that provided these services. We did it for Popeyes was our number one station, and we did it via satellite, which turned out to be an extremely expensive proposition because, again, in the early 2000s, distribution via streaming was very hard to come by. Most people had dial-up connections, and satellite was very, very expensive. So we went satellite with Popeyes, and it worked great. They loved it. It was very expensive to operate it, and along started coming this internet thing and cable modems and T1 lines and fiber optics and DSL and all these ways of distributing content. Mean there was a better distribution model, and we eventually got it down to a tiny little silver box that you walk into your store, you plug it into your internet, and music comes out of it, and it's all our things. So right here behind me is if you go into any New Balance store, at least most of them, and you listen to the music that's playing and you hear what the guy talking about the product, it's me. So essentially, I do have a radio station on the internet, and it's right there, right behind me, on the air, and it's been going on forever. So I love it.
Fantastic. Wow. We're gonna talk about branding a little bit later. Um, The next question is, uh, what lessons have you what lessons have you learned from previous work as a radio man that are working with streaming or virtual event or as a virtual events person?
So how do I equate what I learned in radio and translate that into streaming?
Yes.
Um, in its purest form, it's essentially exactly the same thing. Radio, as we've learned it, and that's the reason we called our retail business retail radio, was um, something we're used to. We're used to hearing music, and we're used to it being interrupted with branding announcements about the product, or those little jingles and announcements. 94.1 Star, playing more hits than anybody else. All those things. Those are all branding elements, and to apply that to our retail business made a lot of sense. So as radio moves into a different distribution method, all of those things are fair game. Making it sound like a radio station on the internet, and a lot of them do. I mean, not only are most of the radio stations, if not all of them, available on the internet somewhere. If you've got iHeartMedia, all the iHeart stations are available. All the other different companies that used to be Entercom, I forget they changed their name. If you have a streaming device, like I don't want to say her name because then I'll activate everybody's unit, but ALXEA, the Google player, you could probably say to it, play Rock 94 in Albuquerque, and off it'll go. So that transition is easy. The only thing that's different are the metrics that you can gather about the listeners, because radio, you can't tell how many people are listening to it unless you do like a radio survey, which is very cost prohibitive, and the methodology is not the best. But with the metrics available on streaming, you know exactly how many people are listening, you know how long they're listening, and you know what they're listening to. So there's a direct correlation to if you're running an advertisement on a national radio streaming service, it's possible to know exactly who is listening to it. You can even break it down by psychographics, so you know who, what age, the demographics, what lifestyles do they like, how long did they listen, did they immediately tune out, all of those things. So those are the cool things that are happening as radio transitions into streaming.
Very cool. Please share some thoughts about but before I read that question, let me just say, guys, this is a opportunity to put your questions in, to ask Mitchell the questions you want to ask him. Come on now, come on. We got about a good 25 minutes left. Please put your questions in. All right. Please share your thoughts about being a problem solver.
Oh, well, I guess everything is solving a problem, and you just continue to solve them over and over again, or as you go along until there are no more problems to solve, and then there's probably a whole bunch more problems to solve on top of that. So look at them as a challenge, not as a failure. And if you're going to fail forward, as we like to say, so that it was a learning experience. Because sometimes people don't do the right thing for whatever reason, and instead of scaring them off or firing them, use it as a learning opportunity to say, hey, this is why it didn't work. And I think, Tony, as we're older, more experienced people talking to our millennial cousins who are now coming into our line of work, they're probably resistant to a lot of those when I was a boy stories. But the reality is you just got to keep trying to tell them so they don't make necessarily the same mistakes or not make them the same way.
Absolutely. Do you use social media? If so, what platforms?
Oh, gosh. If you were a radio guy, and this is making the assumption I'm currently in radio, which I'm not, I would use Facebook, not MySpace, Mitch, Facebook, Certainly Twitter. There's so much more to talk about. And if you listen to your radio station, all they talk about in between the music now is go to their website or their Facebook page or whatever, because they're trying to engage their audience in ways they never did before. And you can. I mean, when I used to be a disc jockey on a top 40 radio station in the 70s, we didn't have this amount of touch with our audience. They could call in and request a song, but we couldn't discuss it offline in detail. Like, isn't that cool that that artist is doing this, or what's that song really mean? And here's a secret. All the things that go along with it. So social media, absolutely, it goes hand in hand with any kind of communications, particularly entertainment.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Chris Clark from Tempe, Arizona asked, Mitchel, I've been told that I have a great face for radio. Is this a compliment?
No, it isn't. My mom told me that when I was getting into the business. And by the way, my parents supported me when I decided to make a career choice to go on radio, but more on that later. No, I think that's just a funny way. It's a funny saying. I've heard it before. You have a face for radio, sure. Okay, it means I'm ugly. Okay, I get it. But I have a great voice in spite of that. Hey, but nowadays you can't get away with it so easily because even radio stations like morning shows are being streamed while they do their actual broadcast. So if you don't have a face for radio, you're in trouble.
Okay. We have a question again from Michael D. Jenkins, Triumphant, the artist, North Carolina. Not sure. Okay, you guys move the question. I can't read it. I think it said something about not being sure that it's a. All right, thank you.
See, Tony has the advantage of having somebody whispering in his ear telling him, here's what he really was saying. Meanwhile, my dog is responding to another dog barking.
How do you combat latency in recordings? They weren't sure. This is from Triumphant, and he was asking, how do you prevent latency? He wasn't sure whether or not this was an office hours question or a conversation with Tony Mobley question. But if you can answer it, then it's a conversation with Tony Mobley question.
Well, why not? Let's answer an office hours question on your show, and they'll get a sample of what they're missing if they're not watching office hours. I can tell you it depends on what kind of a DAW you're using or a digital audio workstation. And nowadays, latency is an issue because when you start adding processes to the audio as it's being processed, it's being subjected to algorithms and DSP, which has to have time, granted a very fast time, to process and make those changes, if it's EQ or compression or pitch shifting or whatever. And that causes latency, which is delay. And when you start matching things up that have different kinds of delay, the music is no longer in sync. And our ears are very, very sensitive. It's not like video. Audio requires that you have to have millisecond accuracy between the different parts. So when you're building tracks for a musical piece and your recording gear that you're using, I don't know which DAW you're using, you have the ability to offset the latency or the delay. So essentially, you want everything synced up exactly so that when the downbeat on the drum hits, it's hitting at the right point, not slightly ahead or slightly behind. So that's how you have to combat it. If it's a live situation, you have to be very careful, and it does require a good front of house engineer that has a professional console like a Digico or a Midas or a Calrec that has all that stuff built into it. And the faster the processors inside those consoles and those devices, the more likely it's going to be able to do all of that work that it has to do and spit the result out fast enough not to delay it more than 20 milliseconds is when you start to notice.
And I'm going to say that was a great answer.
Oh, thank you.
And if you did not understand Mitchell's answer, I'm sure Triumphant did. But if you didn't understand, I encourage you to check out office hours, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. So that's where you can get a deeper dive into
Yep,
the things
Michael.
that.
Michael, you ought to put that question in as is into office hours, and you'll probably hear a completely different answer that's exactly right. So that's the beauty of office hours, as Tony was saying, that you can ask the same question over and over, and you'll get a little different perspective from different experts in there. But that's a question for our audio moguls that are in there. I'm okay with audio like that, but I'm not the best.
Thank you, Triumph, for your question, and thank you, Mitchell, for your answer. Can we talk about your work in office hours community? Question reader?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a natural for me to do. I mean, there's some things I'm real good at doing and some things I'm bad at, and I know it. One of the things that disappoints me no end is that I used to go out on all shoots and schlep equipment around and do things. I can't do that like I used to. My knees just aren't cooperating. So I can't be helpful on a location shoot, but I still got the voice. So why not be one of the guys that does? There's a job when you're on office hours, and there's a number of jobs being done. People in front of the camera and some behind the camera. And one of the jobs is reading the questions for Alex. I enjoy doing it. Another person that does it, who happens to have been one of your interviewees, um, Bill Davis, also does it. And a lot of us are, for lack of a better term, old radio guys that have announcer voices. So, yeah, that's what I do. I read questions. I did it today and I did it yesterday. I might do it towards the weekend. I try to get like 2 in a week to keep my chops going. But what's interesting about it is that other than doing a lot of voiceover work, which all this gear behind me is for, I haven't done a lot of the question reading in many years, and office hours provides an opportunity to keep my chops good, do that. And there are other things too. Being here is one thing. We had the office hour space project, which John Preto did. That again, another person that's been on your program, where we launched a rocket, and I wasn't there. Doing all the things that everybody was doing in order to get that rocket into the air. But like a lot of other people, I worked behind the scenes doing different things that I could do. I'm also a graphic designer doing motion graphics. I designed some animations. I guess I could show you one if you wanted to see it.
Sure.
One animation. Here it is right here. This is an animation I did for the this is sort of introducing the office hour space program. It brings in their logo. There's the rocket, and then the patch, which was based on this little guy. So it's just an example. I mean, I like graphics, so that made sense. That was something that I could go into and do that. I also did a piece with Chris and for engines, and Chris Fenwick. I'm sorry, I should have said his whole name. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities, and you're encouraged to volunteer to do those things. And I don't think I'm doing enough yet. I'd like to get more in there. I'm just sort of shifting my priorities around so that I'm available. But the easiest thing is to get in there and be the reader or the announcer guy. I guess between me and Bill and Courtney and a few of the others were the voices of office hours.
Very cool. Thank you so much for that answer. Triumphant is back. Um, Sounds like I have to ditch this old ThinkPad and embrace some better technology. LOL. Yeah, I'm going to say that you probably will have to do that. and it is the price of paying tuition for all of the wonderful things that you learn in office hours.
Yeah, it's a big rabbit hole. Once you jump through it, you're in there, and you'll be spending money. But hey, look at all the opportunities you have. You'll be able to learn new techniques and discover ones that other artists are using, and you can incorporate that into your repertoire. It's just it's like when we were younger and we got the box of crayons and all the colors. Well, who wouldn't want the big box with all the crayon colors in it? Because that's what digital technology brings to the table: is lots of crayons, lots of colors, lots of chances to do things and improve your the quality of the work you do. So good luck with that, my friend. ThinkPad, very old, just the name itself.
Okay. How did you get your sense of humor from? Where did you get your sense of humor from?
Me?
Yes, you.
Ah, it's something that I indulge myself with, and it's kind of I'll just tell you. Um, I live to watch people and what they do under different situations. I could find myself entertained sitting in a corner or at the mall and just watching people interact and watching things develop. And if I can participate in that process by telling a joke or doing something funny or punking somebody, I will do it because I just like seeing how people react. Because think about it for a second. What humor does is that it triggers something. I don't care what language you speak. I don't care where you come from. I don't care if you are one part of the country, and even Russians perhaps have a sense of humor. If you do something funny, it invokes that laughter reflex, and it's you can't if it's funny, you don't have to think about it. It just happens. So what is that? That to me is fascinating. That what is humor, and why does that cause that reaction? The closest I can come to it is it's a ironic twist of logic, one you did not expect, and that makes you laugh. So I live for that. So to answer your question, humor to me is my joy of life. Seeing it happen and I'm trying to be the funny guy all the time. The only problem with it is it's funny maybe 1 out of 10 times. The rest of the time it falls flat. To be a comedian, you almost have to be a little bit angry, a little bit fierce to try it and have a thick skin to deal with the consequences because you can get into a lot of trouble. My sister claims that I have a bad case of comedy Tourette's. She says you walk into a situation, you see something happening, and you say it, no filter, and people either fall out laughing or they glare at you and throw you in the river.
And we have another comment from Michael D. Jenkins, Triumphant the Artist. Oh, I'm in there. Registered last week, and it's mind blowing. So he's talking about office hours.
Oh, good for you. I mean, it'd be great to have you. And you know what? This is an opportunity for people that are curious about being on the panel. It's the easiest thing in the world. You don't have to lurk, but if you're fearful of joining, just be a producer and ask questions in the background and watch how things go. It office hours, as we've said before, is a conversation, and nobody should be left behind. That means that eventually, office hours is going to have it with me, and they're going to be done with me, and I need to move on. But we need new people to come in and bring new, fresh blood and expand our bubble, if you will, into new areas. So I would love to have musicians and artists to be part of it because there's a lot of very relevant questions that speak not only to the technology but to the state of affairs in the world, the way people are entertained, the reason that there is technology in the first place. We're developing all these wonderful plugins and digital audio workstations so that you artists can take advantage of those box of crayons to make bigger and better pictures.
Yeah, I just would add to what you just said, Mitchell, that Triumphant Michael Jenkins is a performing artist, And I think he was used to, just performing in local in-person arenas. And I think that based on our conversation last week, he understands that now he can be a performing artist that can perform globally. And so I think that is that certainly informed our conversation last week. And I'm excited for him for the potential for what because he shared some of his work with us during the conversation last week, and and it was great. So
Yeah, I agree. Tony,
I'm
you're
glad
right
you're
on the
part of it.
money. Michael, come on board. We want you. We need you. Again, we don't leave anybody out. We need your opinion. We need your diversity and quality of questioning to make it. It just adds to another part of the fabric of what makes office hours what it is.
Yeah.
And encourage everybody else listening. Come on board.
And guess what, Mitchell? We only have 10 minutes left. So we're going to get through these questions. So what's next for Mitchell Hill?
I think you're seeing it for me. I mean, I think you only have so many shots. It's not going to be another big business where big investments are made. That the concept of if you build it, they will come. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on what's going on between my ears as it begins to evolve. Office hours has opened my mind to different possibilities. I need to give back, and this is a great venue to give back. And talking to Tony here gives me a little opportunity to give back, whether it's experience or just an observation on what all this stuff is about. So, trying to leave a little bit behind and not just be a consumer along the way.
Dr. Clark is back again. Dr. Clark says, sense of humor is both a blessing and a curse. You are able to see 5 or 6 levels of possibility in every situation. Saying one of them out loud can surprise and delight others. Others are irritated, and that you are not talking to them seriously, not taking them seriously. I'm sorry.
Well, you're exactly right. And I look at the crowd in the office hours, and sometimes I do something that I think is just absolutely hugely funny, and I get no response. And that's the curse of being funny and throwing it out there. Even if you run it through your head first, if I run it through my head first and I start laughing out loud, I sound like a stupid idiot for doing it. But it's that one. It's like playing golf. I mean, I'm a lousy golfer, but there's always that one shot on those 18 holes that was brilliant. And when I put my head on the pillow at night and I think about that one shot, all the 100 other bad shots go away, and I just think about that one putt that I made. It was brilliant.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, for your great question. All right. And I think this might be our last question, Mitchell.
Oh no.
So you're speaking to the world. What do you want them to know?
I'm glad you asked that question because I think it's a good one. What's happening right here is something that the world needs to pay attention to. We're getting tribal in the way we communicate with each other. We can't go far enough in a conversation between ourselves without running into something that instantly polarizes people. And I like the idea that Tony is doing a conversation, not an interview necessarily, but a conversation that goes where it will go willy-nilly. And we haven't once bumped into something that was a polarizing wall. Here's two people plus the people out there that are asking their questions, and we're communicating, we're sharing ideas, and we're speaking of our philosophies. and we've had an insightful conversation. I'm the better for the conversation that happened because I'm saying things that maybe I haven't verbalized before, but now I'm saying it. And I'm saying it on the internet, and I'm saying it to Tony, somebody that I respect, and it's all good. Um, it's so very important that the world learns to talk to each other again. I'm so afraid we've lost so much of that ability to be able to do that because we're becoming so tribal, and it leads into so many other bad areas that we're experiencing in life today. So keep the conversation going. That's the most important thing you could do.
Wow. Thank you, Mitchell. Appreciate you. And thank you so much for being on tonight.
Thank you.
A special thanks to Kimberly Mobley, Ron Mobley, Global Family and Friends, Alex Lindsay, Office Hour members, DVE Store, Limited Entertainment Technologies, Byte Hive, VDO360.com, Proofalone.com, Cloud Bedrock LLC, Ken George, Jonas Natel, Aaron Huslich, Cherrick Cheetah, David Brady, Marcus Lee Folk, Richard Lavery, Chris Fenwick, Manolo Lozano, Jeffrey Powers, Bo Cordell, Mickey Macature, Hasmut Gaijar, Doug Moeller, Laura Thompson, Brian Shan, Dennis Champion Walker, Roscoe Jones, George Butters, Joshua Menden, Danielle Maxwell, Conversation with Tony Mobley, producer, Clylock Lopez Waterman. Thank you all so much for your participating. Mitchell Hill, thank you so much for this great conversation and your great work. Conversation.
And thank God for Tony Mobley, everybody. Come on, give it up.
Next week, we are having PhD Dr. Morris on from Morehouse College. She's going to be talking about the metaverse. This is an important conversation. Last month, she was on Office Hours, and she is going to be talking about the importance of the metaverse for regular, everyday people. This is an important conversation. You want to be here next week for this conversation. If you like Conversation with Tony Mobley, we ask again that you like and subscribe. We want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. And as I said, we will see you next week. Take care and good night. Bye, everyone.